This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Stone Glacier. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Stone Glacier, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Good afternoon, Mackenzie. Great to see you and welcome to Talk is Sheep. It's nice to have you on.
Hey Kyle, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys today.
Awesome. So I'm looking in your office. I see it looks like an elk shed, maybe. Is it an elk or is it something else?
Yeah, I found a elk shed set when I was mule deer hunting a couple years ago in Saskatchewan. So I've got that in my office, and then you probably would like better what's on my filing cabinet. I
Oh,
got a couple sheep back there. I considered
very
putting it more
nice.
in your line of sight because every time I talk to one of you guys, somebody's like, "What's that back there? Did you kill it?" But no, those are just
Yes.
some dead heads that we found. But
Right on. Okay. So for our listeners, Mackenzie, let's talk a little bit about who you are and where you're working at, and obviously in the wildlife realm of things. But let's just talk a little bit about where you're at right now and kind of your day job, if you would.
yeah, so I work for Okanagan Nation Alliance as a senior wildlife biologist. My official title is actually a tmixʷ biologist, which means all living things. I mostly focus on large mammals at ONA, and that's kind of what I've mainly focused on for most of my career is large mammals. Large furry mammals is what I've been my highlight. In the past, like I'm originally from Saskatchewan, from Saskatoon, and so I started out working there. I did the wildlife biology degree, and then I kind of started out working with aerial birds like tree swallows and things like that. And that was pretty good. And I started doing with ducks and things, but I'd always kind of had an affinity for the furry mammals. And so after I did that project, I got a job there working with invasive wild boar for a couple of years. And I really enjoyed that work there. And then after that, I kind of was interested in pursuing my master's. And so I started doing some digging around and seeing if, is there any master's programs that I'd be interested in Saskatchewan? And there wasn't really anything at the time. And so my boyfriend kind of encouraged me, maybe we could expand the search outwards and look in BC. And so I started just emailing some people that I'd seen worked on wildlife, and one of them was working with grizzly bears and asking them if they were looking for somebody to hire for work. And so they actually ended up having a grizzly bear biologist of job available for me. And then also with that same person, they had a master's study in grizzly bears. And so that's kind of how I ended up moving to BC originally.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's back the bus up. Where did the interest in biology come from? So, did you grow up in a rural environment? Were you in town? Talk us through your sort of early days that got you into this line of work.
Yeah, so I grew up in Saskatoon, but my family, I grew up with a family that was into farming. And so my dad was farming with my mom's family. And so we are always traveling back and forth, going to visit my dad out there farming. And so I always spent a lot of time outside. They mostly were doing grain at that time. They used to have some livestock. And so I always just had like an affinity towards animals. I always really liked animals. And my family, like when we were, spending time together, that was kind of one of the things that we like to do was just spend all of our time outside. And so we were always going up north where my dad was from, up in northern Saskatchewan, quadding and hunting and fishing and, snowmobiling and things like that. And so my family was just a really active outdoor family. And I think that's where I kind of got my initial love for the outdoors. And yeah, kind of the classic, when people are into animals and wildlife, they always think that they want to be a vet because you don't necessarily know any other avenue to being able to handle animals. So I definitely wanted to be a vet for a while because there was never really, people didn't really talk about how you actually became a wildlife biologist, I guess. When I was growing up, I didn't know anybody who was in that field. Obviously, some people that are in vets and things like that, but so that's kind of was my initial goal. And then once I got older, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to university, what I really wanted to do. I initially wanted to do crop science and be like an agrologist or something like that. And then once I was starting to do university, you kind of get exposed to some more classes. So there was animal science classes, and my boyfriend's sister is actually in plant biology. She's a plant biologist. And so then she was like, well, what about wildlife biology? And then that kind of kind of clicked for me. I was like, oh yeah, I guess there actually is a route. First people to actually have a job doing this, and I would rather, handle animals outside versus people's pets. Not that there's anything bad with that, but it's definitely more suited to my interests is things outside. But
Would you say there's a pretty strong demand for bios right now? So like we look at the industry like just for jobs and there's tends to be like a lot of jobs in a lot of places. Is there a lot of vacancies right now with these baby boomers retiring and a lot of opportunity or is it kind of a hard area to get into?
I definitely think there is an opportunity for biologists right now, like what you're saying. There is a lot of people that are retiring or kind of getting to that point. And so it is almost like a good opportunity too to, you can get mentored by those people. And then, there is probably vacancies that are coming up in the next couple of years. Um, I've definitely found that, sometimes there's not a lot of jobs listed, on job boards and things like that. So I know it can be a bit disheartening when you look. There might not seem like there's a bunch of jobs, but I've also found that when I've started to reach out to people or just do cold calls, there's often jobs that are, maybe there's term positions or there's something that's coming up or it's not listed just yet. And there does seem to be a lot of opportunities in that sense. And so that's what I've really recommended to people is, it's maybe a bit scary or I don't know, you kind of lose your shame and just start emailing people and seeing what there is. And what I've also noticed in BC is like the wildlife biology field is really not that large of a field. Like everybody kind of starts to get to know each other. So you might email one person and they don't have work, but they kind of recommend you to other people. And so I think that there is definitely a lot of opportunities for younger people to get into the field, especially with, the advances with climate change and the need for more people to be in kind of like the environmental sector.
I'm curious if you look and you're not going to you're a young person, so I can't ask you to look back 30 years, but I think 30 years
Yeah,
ago,
I would be
if you
not
want to
born.
go, exactly, if you want to go into biology, I think you kind of had to almost go the government route, like
Yeah.
99%. But I really feel like with Together for Wildlife and the shared management model in British Columbia now, in BC in particular, I think there's a lot of opportunity because I look at all these nations and all these different entities that now have their own entire natural resource group and they have their own biologists. And so it seems like there's a lot more opportunity than there ever has been.
Yeah, I think so too. And I definitely like thought when I was coming out of my master's and out of my undergrad, when you're trying to think and visualize like where could you possibly get a job, it was kind of, you could get a job at the university or like a Canadian Wildlife Service or a government, and that was kind of where my mind was going. But then now, yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot more opportunities. The bands and the nations are kind of getting to a point where they're able to have their own departments. They're able to have like their own biologists on hand. There's people that are doing like more contracting work or independent stuff, and there's conservation groups like similar to like you guys, but other groups are even hiring their own biologists now as well. So I think there is a lot more opportunities to find a job out there that's not necessarily just within the government anymore.
Very cool. Okay, so you came out to BC, working around the Grizzly Bear. Was that with ONA at the time, or was that somewhere else?
That was with actually with the at the time it was Flynn Rowe. So I was
Okay.
working for the BC government in Nelson for Garth Mowat. And so I was working he's the large carnivore specialist. And so I was working for him, doing like a 7-month contract as a grizzly bear biologist. And then after that I ended up doing my master's where he was one of my co-supervisors. And I did it here at UBC in Kelowna with Dr. Matthew Bourbonnais and then Garth. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And then in the summers, I would work for Garth as a biologist again. And then, yeah, after that, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I came out of my master's and kind of went traveling for a little bit, took a little bit of a break, and then kind of started doing the same thing where I just was trying to figure out who in the Okanagan was hiring for wildlife biology work. And so I started kind of cold call emailing and messaging people and seeing if they were hiring. And one of the guys I reached out to forwarded my name along to someone here at ONA. And then ONA reached out and said, actually, we've just had a position open up for a biologist here, and we'd be interested in you coming to interview for that position.
Very cool. So for our listeners, and maybe we said at the start, but ONA is the Okanagan Nation Alliance. And maybe talk a little bit about how far that nation, I know it's a huge jurisdiction, but kind of talk about geographically how big the area is.
Yeah, so we actually look at my little map here. We call it the duck. It's kind of what it's referred to, but it kind of looks like a rubber duck shape, and so it kind of goes up past Revelstoke and then over towards Nelson down and actually extends down into northern Washington, and then over towards the west into the North Cascades. And so yeah, it's a pretty big territory, and so that's kind of where all of my work encompasses is within the territory. And then any of the stuff that we're doing transboundary, like some of the sheep stuff we're doing transboundary or grizzly bear, we've partnered with some of the nations and the tribes down there, as well as like the biologists from the different departments of fish and wildlife and stuff in Washington. So there's a decent amount of transboundary work that's also ongoing, just because, yeah, most of the animals and, the nation, they don't acknowledge, a border, what a border is, and they don't realize what it is. So got to follow where the wildlife is going.
Yeah, very cool. Let's touch a little bit about the type of work you're doing. So you came on, you did your master's around grizzly bears, came out, and I know you do grizzly bear work with the Okanagan Nation Alliance. What are some of the species that you're dealing with as a biologist in the region?
Yeah, so yeah, grizzly bears is one of them. Bighorn sheep is my other next biggest file. So a lot of bighorn sheep in the Okanagan, and then I do some work with mule deer, and then yeah, kind of wherever, if the nation raises a flag to us, like, oh, we have some concerns about, elk or something in this area, we try and see if we can help out with whatever that concern is. And then I do some wildlife disease work as well. So with one of the main ones being chronic wasting disease that we're kind of working on.
Right. On that note, does you guys go, you said extends all the way up to sorry, you said Revelstoke, but how
Yeah.
far east does it go? So these chronic wasting disease cases that have been identified in the Kootenays, is that in your area?
Well, yeah, the territory goes over towards like yeah, past Nelson, Castlegar kind of area. So I think these most recent cases were over right near Cranbrook, but it's something that we've been really trying to work with the nation on, is because, a lot of people travel around for different harvesting, people's families are from different areas. And so we've tried to work within these different areas to spread awareness and outreach for chronic wasting disease, just because, yeah, most of the nation, I think, resides more towards the Okanagan. So we just want to make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on, just because transporting animals and carcasses back and forth is always a risk for any sort of disease management.
I wasn't intending to do this, but now you got me intrigued about the CWD stuff. So,
Yeah.
so for our listeners, chronic wasting disease is new to British Columbia. There's been two-ish cases identified that we can talk about publicly, and we sit on a committee there. But how does it work with the alliance with ONA? Do you guys sit on these committees? Like, obviously you're deeply involved with the government, but how does that CWD file work? And then are you like the point person on it, or do you have a colleague, or how does that work?
Yeah, so another one of my big parts of my job at ONA is to sit on different committees and working groups and stuff like that for the nation. So I sit on a couple like policy forums and wildlife forums and this chronic wasting disease committee as well. So yeah, I try and sit on those committees and represent the nation, and also you know, hear what's going on and bring that information back to like NRC and or the Natural Resource Committee and the Chiefs Executive Councils, just to make sure that everybody's informed. But I'm trying to be the point person for the nation right now for the chronic wasting disease stuff. We have some technicians that we're getting trained up, but we're trying to, our main goal this like fall and harvest season was to try and increase the information for people, just because sometimes they kind of forget. Like, I'm from Saskatchewan, we've had chronic wasting disease since I was little, so it's like I know what it is, but a lot of people don't understand what it is, or maybe don't understand like the risks associated with it. So we really tried to heavily focus on doing presentations and outreach and just kind of encourage people to submit their heads for a sample. And then also, kind of really stress to people that it is a confidential process. So like you submit a head, obviously if it's positive, like we're going to be reaching out and we're going to have to talk about it after. But, it's something that we are partnering with the province on. It's confidential and just trying to build trust between the nation and, giving data to the province and things like that. And so we actually have had, I think over around 30 samples, which is, I mean, it doesn't sound like much in the grand scheme of things, but we've never had any before. And so I'm really happy with the turnout. And we've made sure that, because people have different traditional uses for the animals after, or they want to use as much as they can. And so we've held on to the heads for people. We're going to ensure that once they're all negative, we'll return them to the community just to ensure that they can use the brains for tanning and different stuff that they want to do.
Yeah, it's a different level of sensitivity to dealing with nations, right? Because
Hmm.
Indigenous people, they look at things and they treat things differently. And then there's, now we're going to come in and we're going to impose all these freaking rules, right? And so
Yeah.
and I think one of the things that, that we've talked about in our, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. I'm going to be careful on, like you said, on confidentiality because they are really sensitive around this stuff.
Hmm.
But just as you know, like transporting matter out of like in highly infected areas, like in the Kootenays, they don't
Hmm.
want you taking, the skull and the brains
Yeah.
and the all that sort of the backbone to they meat only. Like they want you
Yeah.
transporting the meat only effectively or a clean skull
Yeah.
with no brain matter on it. So that's a real challenge because now you get somebody on the island, a nation member on the island that comes and he's doing some sheltering, doing some hunting in the Kootenays, and then he's dragging everything back like he always has, and his dad has, and his mom or dad and grandpa and grandma,
Hmm.
and they've done that for time eternity, and now you know you can't do that, right? So
Yeah. And the BC wildlife health team has been really good at trying to um, come up with solutions because they do realize that that is something that is important to people and people want to ensure that they're not, wasting parts of the animal that they've always used. And so they were the ones that actually gave us the okay that, we can hold these animals in a freezer until we get, that result and then we can release it. And they've really been good about trying to find solutions, which I think is really nice. And I think starting it off on that foot, I think will make a huge difference with people being willing to submit samples versus like, yeah, like what you're saying, people having a difficult time and being told, no, you can't do this anymore. But if you brought it to it with, I understand that you might want to use it for these purposes. And so we have a solution that we want to work with you on. I think that'll make a really big difference.
yeah. How's your job changed now that we have CWD in the province? So, there was always the pre-CWD scenario, and then a couple months ago we got okay, yeah, we've got a problem. CWD's here, and truth be told, it was here before. We just hadn't had it detected
Hmm.
it, right? We all know that. So, how's your job change? Has it been a lot more onerous? I know, like for someone like Kate Nelson for the government, like she's
Yeah.
like this is her worst case scenario, right? It's doomsday for her department. But for someone like you, is it just kind of a little bit extra work, or is it a lot of extra work?
Um, I think it's definitely been extra work for sure. We're trying to see applying for some more funding sources so that I can get somebody to help me just because I think the main thing with the chronic wasting disease right now is honestly just education and outreach with people because most people, they're willing to submit a sample, but I've definitely talked to a lot of people out just incidentally that have hunted in the Kootenays and they didn't know this year that it was a mandatory submission in those areas. And so it's just a lot of outreach stuff. And so we're looking at hiring somebody to help me out just with like getting more outreach and education. And does that include putting up signs like how they have for the invasive mussels, like FYI, this is what's going on here. So it's definitely added a lot of work like that, but I'm definitely happy I like being able to help people get more education to like inform them, but hopefully we can hire somebody to help me out with that. I would definitely appreciate it just because I think there's a lot more that could be done. There's some gaps that we definitely have identified over this past hunting season that I think we could try and work on over the next year.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's segue off of CWD for a bit and talk a little bit about. I want to talk a little bit about governance around what a natural resource department looks like for ONA. So, is there like a Kaylin Glasser and a Mackenzie and that's it, or do you guys have like is it multiple levels? I'm just kind of trying to understand the depth and breadths of your department. And then what I want to do is start talking about some of these specific projects and our relationship with the Wild Sheep Society BC and ONA.
Yeah, for sure. So the way so ONA has a couple different departments, and so ours is the natural resource department. There's also different ones like wellness, there's a fisheries department, things like that. And so our natural resource department, yeah, my supervisor is Kaylin. She's like the manager of our department. And then there's some program leads and senior bios and things like that. And so we have people that focus on like ecosystem work and cultural burning or wildfires. Some of our team focuses on like riparian work or wetlands. Um, some of my colleagues work on species at risk and some of the smaller species or migratory birds and things like that, turtles, snakes. And then we have a couple technicians that kind of, usually they get slotted in where their kind of interests and their skills are, but they're also pretty broad. So we kind of use them across all of our projects. And then we also I try as much as I can to incorporate community technicians into our work. And so that's also a large part of it is we try not to have a ton of technicians hired here at ONA, but I'm really trying to move towards, if we're, let's say, doing a grizzly bear project and I need a bunch of people to come help us do vegetation plots or things like that, we'll pair our ONA technician with some community band technicians and try and get them trained and then get them to, help us do the work. And so that's kind of the way we're trying to structure it is have obviously ONA staff that works here all the time, but then try and get some band technicians and staff to be involved as well.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like that's one thing I've always sort of noted. ONA seem to be a leader within British Columbia from my experience, and granted, my experience is very limited, but I always felt like, Kaylin and her team were always sort of at the pointy end of the spear since I've been involved in the conservation space, doing really good work. So, and then of course we've had the great pleasure of working with you over the last year or two here as well. So, which brings us to sort of our relationship. So the Wild Sheep Society BC and the Okanagan Nation Alliance, we recently signed a memorandum of understanding to work together to benefit bighorn sheep. Maybe talk a little bit about sort of that collaborative approach. Do you guys have any other models like that? Do you work with other stakeholders or environmental groups or anything like that? Maybe just touch a little bit on that relationship and sort of what you would like to see kind of achieved by our relationship, our working relationship as an MOU.
Yeah, so that was really great that we got that signed last month and put that in place. It's something we've been working on for a while. And so what we had kind of proposed is, I guess, the intention or the outcome of like the MOU is to, have something in place, kind of finalizing and showing the relationship between the Wild Sheep Society and ONA and like our commitments to working towards recovering bighorn sheep within the Okanagan. And I feel like both of our organizations, we align in the sense that we want to do as much as we can to try and help the bighorn sheep. And so I think the MOU kind of shows that there's an alignment, a transparency, an agreement for like collaboration and working together to try and do as much as we can for the sheep. So whether that's, helping each other to like fundraise or helping each other with like consistent messaging where we have, joint letters or things like that. I think it's always key to have, when you have a collective voice, I feel like there's more power behind what you're trying to do. And so that's something that we've been trying to do over this past year is just increase the collaboration and I guess togetherness of some of these projects. And I think the bighorn sheep one is a really good example. And I'm really hoping that from it, we can kind of there's a lot of like the ball is really rolling right now. And so I think having so many partners in the Wild Sheep Society with ONA, I think if we can try and keep this ball rolling with all the good work that's going on with the bighorn sheep in the Okanagan, I think it's just a good way to keep it going for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Well said, Mackenzie. And we feel the same way. And that's our approach to it too. We have so many shared values when it comes to bighorn sheep in the Okanagan region, and it's just a great opportunity to work together. And it was really exciting to be out there for the MOU signing and the pen opening. That was brilliant. It was so much fun to be there, and just you just felt a sense of, I guess, community and like common bonds when we were out there, and we felt really welcome on ONA's territory and at the pens there. So it was an awesome day for me for sure, and really lots of fun.
It's really good.
Let's talk about Bighorn Sheep now. So let's talk about, why, what brought us together. So let's explore sort of like your experience, like what are historical numbers? What are some of the big issues? Obviously Psoroptes is big, but there's Mycoplasma pneumonia. So let's just do the deep dive on everything relating to Bighorn Sheep in the Okanagan, in your traditional territory, the ONA's traditional territory.
Yeah, so I've worked here for about, I guess it's been over 2 years now in the Bighorn Sheep file. And so originally I was working with Craig McLean. So he's been a really good mentor and trying to update me and get me to have a knowledge of all the historical data on the sheep. That guy's a big wealth of knowledge doing it for over 15 years. So that's been really appreciated. Yeah, so the sheep in the valley have definitely been seeing some declines for over the last couple of years. And so right now, there's around 700 or so sheep across the valley. Historically, there's definitely higher numbers in the past. There's definitely been a lot of different factors influencing why the sheep have not been doing as well lately. Kind of like what you were saying, there's been like the Okanagan is a very beautiful, popular area. So there's been a lot of people, immigrating into the area and trying to wanting to live. And so that just means that we have to expand lots of the urban areas. And so there's been a lot of habitat fragmentation going on. There's a lot of ponderosa pine encroachment and different forest encroachments in lots of the areas that the sheep prefer. And so sheep, they really like a nice open sight line. And so some of these areas we're seeing a lot of ingrowth going on, and with a lot of the fire suppression activities that are happening, and there's a lack of cultural burning that used to be ongoing, we're just seeing that these habitats are not necessarily in the same state that they used to be years ago. And that's what a lot of the community and elders have been saying as well, is, over the years, like the habitat, used to burn every 5 or 7 years, just a nice low intensity burn. And that was, lots of animals prefer that, like mule deer do as well. And so we definitely don't have that as much anymore. So the sheep's habitat is just kind of shrinking and shrinking a little bit. So that's always an added pressure to them. And so as that's an added pressure, and then you get introductions of some of these diseases. And so one of the ones that we saw a large decline in the sheep was from blue tongue, over in the Granby population, which blue tongue is a naturally occurring disease. So that's not one that we're going to try and, find a solution for or try and find a vaccine or anything like that. It just occurs when there's really hot and dry weather and almost drought conditions, and it blows up on a midge. And then the sheep get it. They end up usually having a large die-off. I think we had about 75 or 80% of all of the collared sheep over there ended up dying. And so it doesn't just affect sheep either. It can affect mule deer and white-tailed deer and things like that. And so that definitely had a large impact on the population over towards the Granby. So far, those sheep seem to just be with only that disease affecting them, but some of the other populations, like the South Okanagan, is also being impacted by Mycoplasma pneumoniae. So those sheep, unfortunately, got pneumonia from, we're not exactly sure where, but some sort of domestic farm of either goats or sheep. And so those sheep have been saw some large die-offs in the past, but now ever since then, we've just been seeing low recruitment rates. And so every year there's just not a great lamb recruitment. And so what kind of happens with that disease is the different ewes or rams can be carriers of it, almost like when we had COVID, where somebody could carry COVID but not actually, be sick. And so those sheep are passing it on to the other sheep, and the lambs are usually protected when they're on the mother's milk. They get the antibodies from her milk. But then once they're weaned off of her milk, we've been seeing that, by the end of August and September, when they're getting weaned, they are experiencing some die-offs. And so our lamb counts have not been very great. We want around 30 to 100, or sorry, 30 lambs per 100 ewes. And we've been seeing about 12 lambs per 100 ewes. So we're at about half of what we'd want for the South Okanagan. And that's been the past couple of years. It's only fluctuated between 12 lambs per 100 ewes, 13 lambs per 100 ewes. It's just not really getting any better, just kind of stagnating. So we're not really seeing great population growth in those populations. And then I guess it's not all, it's a little bit depressing, I guess, in the Okanagan. We're like, here's another thing wrong. And then we also have Psoroptes Mange in our Ashenolis milkamine population. This mange, we think, was introduced from a wild game farm 20 years ago or so. And so it came actually from a population of rabbits. And so it's called Psoroptes cuniculi. So it's a strain of mange that's from rabbits. But what we've been seeing in the sheep is there was some large die-offs when it first came out, and then we just been seeing poor overall health with with those populations. And so even like a couple months ago, people were showing me photos of rams that have like severe hair loss from the mange because they get a lot of itching and scabbing, and they get their ears full of crusts, and they just kind of scratch at themselves until they cause their hair to fall off, and then their body condition just gets worse. They can't hear very well out of their ears. And then when it gets cold, they usually don't do very well to the elements. And so that disease is something that we're experiencing, but that is one that there's a potential treatment for. So there's a little bit of hope. It's not all depressing, but
Okay, so yeah, lot of moving pieces. So blue tongue, we've established there's not much we can do about it. It's a die-off,
yeah.
but it's sporadic and it's not common. So hopefully that's a one-off and we don't have another reoccurrence. Mycoplasma ovi pneumonia, that's a much bigger issue, but we're not even tackling that issue really right now at this point. Is my understanding in your region? Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, so we're kind of, because we do know, from other regions that what you can do to treat MOVI, and so you can do a test and remove. And so it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel and come up with a treatment for it. We know what we have to do. So what we have been trying to do is just kind of get ourselves set up for doing a test and remove in the future. So, talking with communities, ensuring that everyone's aware of what the situation is, what is MOVI, what are the potential treatment options, and then also trying to get a better understanding of like what are the herd interactions, trying to put out more collars on animals, put more collars out on rams just to see, just because any animal can be a vector of the disease. So we don't want to do a test and remove. And then, there's a ram wandering around and he's had MOVI and we didn't know where he was, and he's been moving between every population or things like that. And so we're just trying to get a better idea before we do it of just where the herd interactions are, kind of like a risk of contact model is what we call it. And so that's what we've been trying to do, is just a lot of background work for the test and remove, hopefully to come in the next couple of years.
Very cool. Okay, let's talk about the Psoroptes Mange, because that's the main project that we're focusing on right now. The one that the society, along with the Wild Sheep Foundation, we've committed $106,000. So that was funding that the Wild Sheep Foundation and our partners through the society have committed to. So we're in the middle of that project right now. Now, just to back it up for our listeners, in February of 2024, we had a disease symposium that was hosted in Penticton, nearby PIB. And so ONA was highly involved with that. You had a bunch of representatives there. We brought experts in from all across North America and abroad. We brought Dr. Stuart Burgess in from Scotland. Dr. Peregrine Wolf came in from Florida. Whole bunch of leading experts across the US and Canada. Dr. Helen Swanshaw was our lead on that. And I think there was a lot of really good information. And I actually didn't attend because it's in the middle of our fundraiser. So I was integral in setting it up, but other than the intros, I didn't sit in on it. Was that impactful? Was that a good platform? Was it helpful? And in particular, in moving this Psoroptes Mange project forward?
Yeah, I think that was a really, really impactful event. And I think that's also a good example of, what we can do together with like an MOU is, bring all these different people together for a common goal and kind of make a really good project team. And so that's what I found that I got out of it. It was just a nice way to be able to meet all these people that maybe you've heard about on the internet and read their papers and things like that, but actually get to like talk to them and get their experience and their expertise on what we're trying to do. I always think, like personally, I always think it's better to have a large team where because everyone's got their own set of knowledge and their own skills. Like I'm never going to pretend that I know the most about any of this stuff. So it's like if you can bring in someone like Stuart Burgess, who's literally a Psoroptes researcher and have him be part of our team, I think that just makes your whole thing way more robust. And I think that that's just a really positive benefit out of it. And I think all of us kind of left that event feeling a lot more positive and that we could actually, get some stuff accomplished. And then I also really appreciated that, the public, like people were allowed to come from like the communities and then also some of your guys' members. And I think it was a really good way for them to see like the transparency of the work that we're doing and then get updated on what we're doing. And just, I don't know, like people have a lot of passion and value towards bighorn sheep and lots of wildlife species. And so I think it's good to involve people as much as you can. And I don't think it's to our benefit to gatekeep it just to like the researchers and the biologists, in my opinion. So.
Right on. So let's touch a little bit on that. So Dr. Burgess came over from Scotland. Now, there was a Psoroptes Mange trial that was done on ONA's, or it was in PIP's pens. And this was done, I think, 16, 17, so 6-7 years ago, where the work was being done. And it was a similar project. It was led by, I think, Dr. Adam Herring at the time. Dr. Herring was doing his PhD study. Yeah. So he was doing. But at the time, I think maybe the drugs weren't as advanced. There's new technology now. And I feel too, like maybe funding was running out and they were kind of running out of resources. And in the end, the project kind of just came to a natural conclusion, but there was still some more work to be done. So this is kind of like a renewed opportunity for us to try some new drugs in conjunction with Dr. Burgess. Talk a little bit through that. Am I out to lunch and any of this stuff? I'm just like, you're the professional. I'm just like the parrot. So.
No, that's a good synthesis. So yeah, they tried that trial a couple of years ago now, and so they did have some great advancements in that trial. They found out they're able to figure out the strain of the Psoroptes. That's why we know it's a rabbit strain. They trialed a couple drugs. They did kind of end up running out of time, and they didn't want to keep the sheep in the pens for 2 cycles of having lambs, just because the pens would be a little bit too full, and you'd want to let those ewes go with their lambs if we can after about 15 or 18 months. And so they did find that the one drug, it's called Fluorolaner or Brevecto. It's actually like if you have animals or pets or dogs, like it's actually like the worm pill sometimes that you would give your dogs. It's like that little chew kind of pill. And so they found out that that did clear them of Psoroptes, but since they were kind of running out of time at the end of the trial, they weren't able to determine, what is that period of infestation free? How long are they protected? Kind of some of those key questions. And so that's what we're kind of hoping to pick up again is we'll trial that Brevecto again. We have been trying to get our hands on a new version of it. That's an injectable. We've had some struggles with that, but we're going to try and see if we can get our hands on the injectable version because it is being touted as having like 1 year of infection-free period. And so that would be a massive help for us. But there's also after talking with Dr. Burgess, they have some drugs that they use on sheep in Scotland, domestic sheep for Psoroptes. And so we're going to trial those drugs on wild sheep. So working with him, he's kind of figured out, this is like a dosage of this drug that will work, hopefully, for the wild sheep. Maybe we can try a little combination of the moxidectin, it's called, and the Brevecto and see if that works. Try and just figure out what's like the best combination or what drug actually works to clear them of the infestation, and then what actually like keeps them free of it for the longest, so that us as like managers can go and try and treat those sheep on the landscape to try and hopefully eradicate the disease or at least really reduce it out onto the land.
Very cool. Okay, so for our listeners, just to get a really good understanding, this Psoroptes Mange trial, what's happening is you're going to go out, you're going to capture bighorn sheep. Ideally, that's going to happen December, January-ish of this year. 36 sheep, is that the plan?
Yeah, so what our plan is, I think we'll try and start moving sheep, like end of December, probably into January. And so we have 4 pens, and we're going to put around 10 sheep in 3 of the pens, and then we're going to have 6 sheep in one of the pen kind of as a control trial. And then those sheep will be treated with whichever drug, except for the control or with the combination. And then we will handle those sheep once a month just to take samples. Any like animal husbandry that's needed, like do they need their hooves trimmed or things like that. And then we'll try and, figure out how long, like, does one of those drugs actually work, and then how long. Um, the sheep will be kept probably for around 15 to 18 months. And so there will be one round of like the lambing period. And so there will be rams that will be put in the pen, just like one ram per pen, so that they don't miss that cycle of the rut. And then those ewes will, have a lamb, and when those ewes are released, their lamb will go with them. And so that's what they did last time. It seemed to work well. I don't think they had any lamb loss. All the lambs were able to be released. They get a little bit of a boost in life because they got to spend their first couple months of life in a pen where they're getting fed and they're not getting predated on and things like that. And so I think that'll be also good for those, sub herds where we release these sheep back in, is they'll have some good lamb survival as well.
Yeah, so this is a super cool project. First of all, there's like bighorn sheep in a pen, like that's
Yeah.
freaking cool. And so there's going to be possibly some volunteer opportunities, and it'll be in conjunction with the Wild Sheep Society BC. And obviously, we're very respectful. This is on Penticton Indian Band's land, so they've got these pens. You just can't go up there. But also, we're going to be supporting keeping these animals healthy and fed and watered, and so there's that aspect of it too. So they're going to be in these pens for the next 15 months to a year and a half, and of course, the society that's supporting this project in conjunction with ONA will be helping to look after these sheep, feeding, watering, and there'll be these volunteer opportunities. So on these capture days where we're going to have to go out and do some treatments or some animal husbandry that you talked about, there'll be opportunities. So this is a great volunteer opportunity for our members. And but then also too, there's a funding piece, right? Like this is expensive. Like what's our budget for the entirety of the process? Do you have that number handy? I know some of the budgets, and we've got the pen budget, and we've got a whole bunch of. Do you have an idea of roughly what it is, give or take? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just
Let me just look.
It's not cheap. We're talking hundreds of thousands.
No,
of
it's
dollars,
not
right?
cheap, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's over, like, it's getting into like the 300,000s at least, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not including a lot of in kind and people donating their time and things like that. And so it's not a cheap expedition, unfortunately.
Yeah. But that said, we have funding partners, like we said, the Wild Sheep Foundation's involved. And of course, ONA, you guys have money tied up in this.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have any other funding partners? Like, do we have any government money coming in? What does that look like? I see that smile, and we know where that's going. But we're not going to beat up on the government too badly today. But we'll let them know that we're thinking about them.
Yeah, no, it's been good. There's a lot of partners on this project for sure. And like what I was saying earlier, we've been working with the Ministry of Walrus for the past couple of years trying to get this set up. Like there's definitely been some funding constraints over the past couple months leading up to the election from the government in the sense of putting towards this project. Hopefully we're going to trying to, work together to rectify that, just because this project it's not something that's like just in its seed infancy. Like this project is ready to go and it's going to start. And so, we're trying to work with them and just make sure that, we can, have capacity support, working with their regional biologists and things like that, but also like, support from government funding for work like this, which is, truly it is management of bighorn sheep in the Okanagan region, Region 8. And so I think, having dedicated funding to that would be awesome, but we're working on it. Hopefully we get to that point together for sure.
Yeah, and I really think that the government has a responsibility to support this project. Not only that, it's supporting the Region 8 bighorn sheep, but also beyond that, these Psoroptes trials could have benefits for all like bighorn sheep. That there's other herds that are affected and stuff like that. So there's corollary benefits, not just from this. And also, I think that's why the Wild Sheep Foundation jumped in on board as a funding partner as well. It's because what we see from the benefits from the Psoroptes Mange and sheep in the Okanagan region could be translated to any other jurisdiction down the road that end up getting affected too, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because there are other bighorn sheep populations that are infected with Psoroptes down in the States. It's a different strain of Psoroptes. It's like the Psoroptes from domestic sheep, but we are trialing drugs that should cover that Psoroptes as well. And just talking with like Perry Wolf, like Dr. Perry Wolf, when she was down here, she had spoken about how some of their populations had gotten Psoroptes and Movi at the same time. And those populations had massive die-offs when they experienced that. Because I was asking her, what's our risk if the Psoroptes and Movi transfers back and forth across the valley? And she's like, well, unfortunately, it's probably going to be a large die-off just because that's a lot of, diseases interacting in an animal that's already maybe a little bit stressed. And so I think, yeah, it'd be awesome to, yeah, everybody to collaborate on this project. And I think it's just going to be a good example of research that's, yeah, going to have a farther reach than just within Region 8 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's yeah, excellent points. Um, all right, so we talked a little bit about the Psoroptes stuff. So I guess just for our listeners, if you're interested, reach out to the
Yeah.
society. We are looking for volunteers. There's a bunch of pen work that needs to be done, and we've already had a work bee come through. But a lot of what's going on now is we're building these pens. So we've worked closely with contractors. Peter Guccia was one of our directors. He's been really involved on the ground. I know you've been working really hard on this, Mackenzie. So it's really exciting seeing these pens come together, and it's super cool too because this is an opportunity. If somebody's local in town, they could, on given days when we're doing some work, and maybe they can come out, if it's facilitated, and check it out and see what it's like. And there's Bighorn Sheep there. And it's just I don't know. I think it's really cool that this is happening in the local community. And it's so visual to people, that are involved with the project. So.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully we don't have to do this again. So it might be a limited opportunity. Like it's not very common that you have Bighorn Sheep in a pen for a trial of something. And so hopefully we get it this time and we won't have to do it again. So come volunteer and help us out while you can. It might be a limited opportunity, and I definitely could use your help for sure.
Well, and this is kind of I guess a call to action to anyone that's listening. We need support. We need financial support for this. So obviously we've got the initial funding, everything's secured for that, but this is a multi-year project. It's going to be expensive. So we're looking for funding too. I know ONA can't facilitate sort of taking donations, but the society can. And any donations that come in for that's going to go directly towards this project. We're looking good on funding. We're in good shape, but as it expands, we're going to need more money. So anyone that's listening and that thinks they can help out, as always, we're not for profit. We're doing what we can to support this project. So reach out to us. So we actually are putting together, you and I have talked about this a little bit, Mackenzie, about this program, about a sponsorship program. So sponsor sheep, sponsor a pen. Peter and I had some meetings this morning about that. So we're working on some ways to sort of build this out so people can get involved and make a donation and maybe sponsor sheep. They get their, you get your tag and you want tag number 7 and that's your sheep. And hey, maybe you'll even have a baby. That'd be super cool to have a lamb, right? So, so cool.
Get some updates. Yeah. Good Christmas gifts for sure, guys.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Okay. Let's just segue off Psoroptes and just talk about sort of next steps, because you talked about obviously the ONA, the Psoroptes mange issue. So Mycoplasma ovi pneumonia. So are we just going to focus on the mange stuff now and then Movi down the road, or are we going to start working on Movi right now? How does that look?
Yeah, kind of what the plan that Craig and I had kind of went through and, talked with the different communities and stuff about was, when you do a test and remove, you're handling every single one of those animals. And once you've handled them, if it's by helicopter or whatever your method, it can be harder to catch them in the future. And so what we kind of wanted to do for timing wise was to work on the Psoroptes, figure out which drug works. And then once we have that drug in hand, we know that that's what we're going to give the sheep. We're going to try and implement a test and remove. And then when we do that test and remove, we're going to give all of those sheep a shot of the Psoroptes drug. And so we're trying to just be the most efficient that we can, because a test and remove isn't cheap either. And you don't want to be handling animals more than you need to. If we can do it together, that would be great. And so it'll be probably about 15 or 18 months for this drug trial. And then after that, we're going to do a little bit of an on the land trial where we treat some of the animals just in the wild population with the Psoroptes drug, and then try and at that point, get prepped and ready to hopefully do a test and remove where we can then, try and treat both of those diseases at the same time is what we're trying to plan out.
Hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Really ambitious. Like, there's a lot going on, and it's crazy. Like you're basically doing it on your own, really. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, don't get me wrong. ONA's got a natural resource department, but like you're spearheading this Bighorn project basically solo.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work. I enjoy it. Like I really like the sheep project for sure. Um, Definitely miss Craig. Him and I were good buddies on the project for sure. But yeah, it's been good. And I think having these partnerships is a good way for me to get support from people to help, put this stuff in place. Like I can't do everything on my own. I'm going to try and keep it going as much as I can. But if it's great, if, the Sheep Society can help me with getting the drug trial up and going, and get these different groups all together to get things off the ground is amazing.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that actually. Mackenzie, this is like this we signed the MOU, but we've been working together now for a while, and
Hmm.
we this isn't new. Like we've had a good working relationship, but it's been phenomenal actually. Like what we've gone through in the last couple of months since we've signed the MOU and just working together and what we've done so far, it's been really a positive experience for our team. I know that for sure. I can speak on our behalf, and so we're really grateful for it. We're really excited about it, and yeah, really excited about what the future holds. I will comment a little bit about Craig. So Craig McLean's the regional biologist for Region 8. And so he worked for the BC government. And just like things, people change, right? People move on, they take different jobs. Craig's
Yeah.
taken another job within the government. And basically, so now effectively there's a vacancy where Craig was. And there are Region 8 staff in region, but they weren't spearheading the project like Craig was. So there's a bit of a vacancy there. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic because Craig's position hasn't been replaced, if I correctly understand.
Yeah, no, it hasn't been replaced. And so Craig and I will still continue to work together on sheep projects within BC Parks because that's where he's at now, which will be good. But yeah, there's a couple vacancies within the government there, and the staff that is there right now is stretched pretty thin. So they are working with us, but yeah, they're stretched thin for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about sort of future vision. So if we look 10, 20 years down the road, so you talked about 700 bighorns in sort of the South Okanagan area. Where do you see it? Like, so the blue tongue, we probably could expect a rebound because blue tongue's not pervasive, and ideally, those populations will rebound and with normal lamb recruitment. Although there are predation issues, we know all about that. The Granby area and um, um, Grand Forks is really bad there's a lot of coyotes and a lot of predators on the landscape there. That's an issue. But so we're hoping there'll be good lamb recruitment there. We'll see a rebound there. But the Psoroptes thing's not, it's not going to fix itself in the next 6 months, that's for sure. And then, so where do you see, like, if the Psoroptic mange thing goes as good as you hope it does, and we have a successful test and remove, where do you see bighorn populations 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah, hopefully rebounding quite a bit. We've always said that, it's hard when you put an exact number on it. Like, I want to hopefully get 1,400 sheep by this time. It's hard to always try and hit those goals. I think what we want is I would definitely like to see the lamb recruitment go up. I think that's a really good indicator. So like with the Moby populations, if we can get it up to like at least in the 20s, and you guys have seen some of those really good results over in the Fraser with your guys' test, like the test or move over there with Chris Proctor. And so if we can see something like that, I would be extremely happy. Um, One thing that I definitely haven't addressed yet with any of this sheep stuff is like the habitat issues. And that's something that once we kind of get a handle on, the Psoroptic mange or get the drug trial up and going, there's a ton of habitat issues that need to be addressed because, you know, yeah, does seem to be predation going on in like the Granby and Grand Forks, but it's usually perpetuated by a habitat issue. And it seems like over there's a lot of habitat ingrowth. There's trees moving in, lots of shrubs and things like that. And we're seeing animals get kind of picked off because they can't see as well. And so I think that will be a big indicator of like if we can try and open up some of these habitats, try and do some work on the lambing cliffs, like some of the stuff we've kind of started to talk about as a group, that I think we'll see some rebounds in that sense. And then that's the same with some of these other populations like West Side Road. They appear, and from what we've seen from our health testing, they don't have any disease issues. but there's about 75 or 80 sheep in that population, and they seem to just be kind of remaining the same. And so we've been trying to figure out, why are they remaining the same? Why are they always hanging out on the road? They're probably like the most photographed population that we have just because they're just always on the road. And so that kind of stems back to another habitat issue, which we had started planning to try and do some habitat work there, which actually that McDougall Creek fire opened up quite a bit of it. And so we'll see, opening it up, does that move them up off the road? Does that kind of increase their lamb survival because it's now more open? We've definitely seen over in some of the canyons when they try and move across the canyon bottoms, they're getting picked off by predators just because they can't see and it's ingrown. So it's all these like things kind of tied together. And so I think if we can, fix or at least try and address these disease issues and then try and really work heavily on the habitat issues, I think we could see some pretty good gains in our populations here.
Very cool. Let's touch a little bit on habitat and specifically cultural burning. So you talked about let's talk about traditional ecological knowledge. Basically what we're saying is, there's a history with First Nations that, from their experience being on the landscape for, their ancestors have been there for centuries, and they've always said, okay, we go hunting here, we see these animals on these dates in this area, and it's culturally ingrained. It's like they're aware of it more so than because they're so connected to the land base. So how important is that cultural burning piece and the fact that we've lost it? And I know that ONA has been very proactive. We've worked with Kaylin on burns before. You guys have done prescribed burns, but it's so difficult especially with the sensitivities around fire with regards to, people lost their houses in Kelowna, in the West Kelowna this past year. So people are scared. I get it. So, how important is that traditional ecological knowledge, and how important is it that we can't do these cultural burns that you guys have done historically?
Yeah, I think it's been a really big thing that's been lost, not just for sheep, but for the environment in general and all species, is we've kind of shifted the fire regimes and all of the fuel loads so far the other way that now when there is a fire, it's like these really high intensity, high burn fires like we saw in McDougall Creek, which, yeah, they are frankly quite traumatizing for people because people lose their homes, they lose all their items and things like that. And so then when you come back in and say, hey, we want to do a burn, there is a lot of fear. And so I think there's a lot of education and outreach that could be done, just kind of showing. And maybe that's also within demonstrating like the traditional ways of cultural burning and show that like this has been going on since time immemorial, that people were doing burns and they did it on these different cycles. And they found that by, let's say, burning every 5 years, you keep the fuel load down, you keep it nice and open. And it's something that's just like when there is a lightning strike, there's not 3 feet of like pine needles to just explode behind your house. And so I think if we can try and show that it's something that worked for all of this time and try and like work with people to set it up and as almost like wildlife is a secondary part, in a lot of people's minds, but like human safety, fire risk reduction is a large part of it as well. So if we can phrase it in that sense, like, getting to do this cultural burn in this area, yes, it's good for sheep, but also it's good for you because, it might prevent your house from burning down in the future and things like that. So I think if we try and, weave it together, I think that could be a big aspect of it.
Yeah, awesome. A lot to digest there. We've talked a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Anything we're missing? Anything we need to talk about before we wrap up? I'm going to get you to talk about your fall and some personal stuff here.
Yeah.
But anything else that we need to discuss on the ONA front, Bighorn Sheep, MOU, anything else we missed?
Yeah, no, I think it's been really great. Yeah, we always appreciate, people sharing with us things that they're seeing out on the land. Like, there's only so many of us biologists that are out and about at a time. And I know that like, traditional people harvesting, but also like resident hunters, like they're out on the land quite a bit. They see lots of different things, and it's always good to have an extra set of eyes and ears out on the ground. And, if you guys see something weird, if you see a sick animal, if you see that like, oh, all the sheep used to always hang out here, now I don't see a single sheep, like, what do you like? Just share that with us. I always appreciate that type of information. And we've seen in the past that like even Psoroptes Mange, it was originally noticed by a wildlife photographer. And so they saw something weird and they shared it with biologists, and then we can kind of go from there. So I always appreciate, yeah, people just sharing stuff, and like you can definitely put my email on the podcast or whatever. And I always appreciate people sharing things that they see.
Right on. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mackenzie, for all you do and
Yeah.
all the work, and just look forward to supporting the great work that yourself and Kaylin and all of ONA is doing, and for all wildlife, and certainly with Bighorn sheep too. So awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just spent time out. You went back home. Were you deer hunting, or what were you doing out there?
Yeah, I went back home to go mule deer hunting with my parents and my boyfriend back in southern Saskatchewan, down like right above the Montana border.
Where, like, give or take, well, like, what's the closest town on the border, give or take?
So it's about like 2 hours south of Moose Jaw. The closest town
Okay.
is called Rock Glen, Saskatchewan. Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
where my
Right on.
boyfriend's from originally, but yeah, it's a nice area. Lots of like open grasslands and farming and a lot of coulees, like
A
deep
little different
coulees.
than the Okanagan.
It's very different. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
very windy.
Did you guys get anything?
Yeah, my dad got a mule deer, so that was good. Yeah.
Okay. A good buck, or what was it?
Yeah, it was a decent buck. I don't know what, I don't really score them or anything, but we were
Right.
definitely happy with it. It looked nice and healthy. I haven't got our chronic wasting disease results back yet, so hopefully it was all good. But yeah, it was a really good hunt. It was nice to get everybody out. My mom hasn't went out as much in the past, and so I think it was nice to get her out and kind of see what it's all about. I definitely kind of forget sometimes that I hike all the time. And so I think I almost killed my parents a couple times. I'm like, all right, we're going to go hike up this coulee and down this coulee and up the other side. But I think it was really good. It was some really nice areas down there. Lots and
Nice.
lots of mule deer. Definitely a bit different than the Okanagan.
Yeah, I grew up in southern Alberta, and well, we had
Yeah.
a CWD issue there too. But yeah, when I was growing up, there's so many deer there. It was amazing. It was a mecca.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about you guys because we were down there, we saw lots of pheasants. So I was wondering how you guys did on your pheasant hunt.
Yeah, we had a great trip. I'm not a very good shot, I'll say that, but we had a great time. So yeah, yeah, for sure. So no, that's awesome, Mackenzie. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. And yeah, what is your email? Let's put it on here right now so people can grab it.
Yeah, it's MCLARKE at SYILX.org.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds great. We'll put it in the show notes too. And but thanks so much for doing this today. Appreciate it, and just really excited about working on bighorn sheep and other wildlife as we move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I really do appreciate all your guys' work and effort on Bighorn sheep in general.